The rise, glory, and tragic end of a world conqueror. Forces inflicted heavy losses when Alexander was born in Pella, the capital of the Kingdom of Macedon, on July 20th, 356 BC. He was the son of King Philip II and his fourth wife Olympias, a princess from Epirus. As a child, Alexander was raised in the traditional manner of Macedonian nobility. He was taught to read, play the lyre, ride horses, fight, and hunt. However, King Philip had greater ambitions for his son. He entrusted Alexander's education to none other than the philosopher and scientist Aristotle. It was Aristotle who trained Alexander in rhetoric, literature, and sparked his deep interests in science and philosophy. By 340 BC, at just 16 years old, Alexander had completed his studies under Aristotle and was summoned by his father to begin learning how to rule. When Philip went to war against Byzantium, Alexander was entrusted to act as regent of Macedonia, a sign of the king's confidence, even though Philip had many seasoned advisers round him. In 339 BC, while Philip was away, the Mede tribe in the north rebelled. Alexander responded swiftly. In what would be his first military campaign, he crushed the rebellion, expelled the Mede from their homeland, and founded a city in the rugged mountain region, in what is now modern-day Bulgaria, naming it Alexandropolis, and settling loyal citizens there. In 338 BC, Philip and Alexander together marched south into Greece. The united armies of Athens and Thebes attempted to hold their advance at Charonia. Philip commanded the right flank, while Alexander, flanked by many of the king's top generals, led the cavalry on the left. In a strategic move, Philip ordered a feigned retreat. Luring the enemy forward and breaking their formation, he then ordered a sudden counterattack. The Macedonian forces decisively crushed the enemy lines. The defeat forced Thebes into submission and left Athens encircled and defenseless. Following the battle, Philip's admiration for his son grew immensely. He even took pleasure in hearing soldiers call Alexander their king. With victory secured, Philip and Alexander marched through Greece. All major city-states, except for Sparta, welcomed the Macedonian army. Despite this, open conflict with Sparta was avoided. In 337 BC, Philip convened a Pan-Hellenic Congress at Corinth, calling on all Greek city-states, except Sparta, to form the League of Corinth. While this league preserved the outward appearance of independence, in reality, all member states were now subordinate to Macedonian rule. Returning to Pella, Philip fell madly in love with a young woman named Cleopatra, who was even younger than Alexander. He soon married her. Cleopatra was of pure Macedonian descent. Unlike Olympias, who came from Epirus, any child born from Cleopatra would carry unquestioned Macedonian bloodline. Casting doubt on Alexander's status as rightful heir, tensions boiled over during the wedding celebration. In a fit of anger, Alexander left Macedonia with his mother and sister, returning to his maternal homeland in Epirus. However, Philip could not abandon his brilliantly trained son. Eventually, reconciliation occurred, and Alexander returned to Pella. In the summer of 336 BC, King Philip was assassinated. The Macedonian army and nobles quickly declared Alexander, now 20 years old, as the new king of Macedon. Upon his accession, Alexander swiftly eliminated all potential rivals to the throne. Within weeks of his father's death, he had secured complete control of both the government and the army. Some Greek city-states like Athens and Thebes saw Philip's death as a chance to reclaim independence. Alexander's advisors urged him to first consolidate power within Macedonia before turning to Greece or Persia. But Alexander had no intention of abandoning any territory or goals his father had achieved. Thus, immediately after becoming king, he began diplomatic missions to secure loyalty from the Greek city-states. Thebes, which had shown the most hostility, surrendered as soon as Alexander appeared at their gates at Corinth. The League of Greek city-states, once again, except for Sparta, officially recognized Alexander as supreme commander, or hegemon, in the upcoming war against Persia. At the same time, northern tribes saw Philip's death as an opportunity to revolt. Alexander quickly led military campaigns northward to suppress these rebellions. While he was away, Thebes once again conspired with Athens and others to revolt. Furious upon hearing this, Alexander gathered his forces and marched south with great speed, laying siege to Thebes. Despite fierce resistance, the city was eventually overwhelmed. Since Athens and other allies failed to support Thebes, the city fell. Alexander ordered its complete destruction. Over 30,000 residents were sold into slavery, sparing only the priests and religious temples. Athens, seeing Thebes' fate, quickly submitted. Representatives from the Greek city-states again convened at Corinth and officially appointed Alexander as leader of the War of Vengeance against Persia, a campaign meant to avenge the Persian invasions of Greece a century earlier. Unlike Philip, Alexander now envisioned not just a political alliance, but a unified Hellenic identity under Macedonian leadership. The war would also serve to redirect internal Greek tensions outward, against a common enemy. In May of 334 BC, Alexander set out with an army of 37,000 troops, a coalition of Macedonians and Greeks, crossing the Hellespont into Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. His campaign was supported by Europe, and he continued to recruit soldiers from among local populations. His first major encounter was at the Granicus River, where Persian forces had gathered, roughly 20,000 infantry and 20,000 cavalry. To stop his crossing, without hesitation, Alexander led a daring cavalry charge across the river under a barrage of missiles. His soldiers, bloodied and battered, climbed the muddy riverbanks and engaged the enemy. Macedonian heavy infantry soon followed, crossing and forming ranks on the opposite bank. The Persian forces were overwhelmed, with more than half their troops killed or fleeing the battlefield. This decisive victory at Granicus allowed Alexander to take control of most cities in Asia Minor, using a mix of military strength and diplomacy. He gained the submission of towns and cities. By early 333 BC, he had secured the coastal territories of Lycia and the western Cilician plain near the Halys River. Although Alexander had achieved all victories since beginning his campaign, the overall balance of power had not yet fully shifted. Many of his generals believed that Philip's original goals had been fulfilled, but Alexander's ambition extended far beyond. He wanted to see the complete destruction of the Persian Empire. Meanwhile, Darius III, the Persian king, began preparing a massive counterattack, planning to launch a naval invasion of the Aegean and stoke rebellion among the Greeks to turn the tide in response to rising threats against Macedonia. Alexander issued orders to secure control of the seas. In the summer of 333 BC, upon learning that Darius III was advancing into Syria, Alexander immediately left Cilicia to confront the Persian king. The two forces clashed at the Battle of Issus, in rugged terrain that rendered Persian cavalry ineffective and gave Macedonian heavy infantry the advantage. Alexander personally led the assault. Crushing the Persian forces, Darius fled the battlefield and retreated toward the Euphrates River, leaving behind his family and royal treasures, all of which fell into Macedonian hands. Darius attempted to negotiate, offering all territories west of the Halys River in exchange for peace. But Alexander refused, declaring himself the rightful ruler of all Asia. and insisted that only he had the authority to decide the fate of the Persian Empire, despite the victory. Alexander's situation remained precarious. Many Greek city-states, though outwardly submissive, still harbored rebellious intentions. One of Darius's top generals, Memnon, had retreated to Cappadocia and Phrygia, recruiting new troops and threatening Alexander's supply lines. At the same time, a Macedonian general named Menon, sent to suppress rebellion, turned traitor and joined the Persians. Meanwhile, Darius was amassing a new army in the east. Even more dangerous was the Persian navy, still active in the Aegean Sea, threatening Macedonia's western flank. To eliminate this threat, Alexander aimed to take control of the Phoenician coast, where the Persian navy had its main bases. Thus, Alexander abandoned the pursuit of Darius and marched south along the Mediterranean coast. His rival prompted many Phoenician cities to surrender. The king of Sidon, Abdashtat, expressed a desire to remain neutral. But Alexander knew that without control of Tyre, the main naval hub, Phoenicia would never truly be secured. In January 332 BC, he launched a siege of Tyre, which had moved its urban core to an island about 1 kilometer offshore. Lacking a navy, the Macedonians began building a causeway across the sea to reach the city. But in deeper waters, the construction slowed and Tyrian. Eventually, Alexander received naval reinforcements from previously conquered Greek city-states. With the island isolated, the siege dragged on until August. Tyrians resisted fiercely. But after a massive final assault led personally by Alexander and 8,000 elite troops, the city fell. Over 2,000 soldiers were executed, and 30,000 civilians were sold into slavery. Only priests and temples were spared. This victory gave Alexander full control of the Phoenician coast, and all remaining cities quickly submitted. Following the fall of Tyre, Alexander marched toward Egypt, then still ruled by Persian loyalists. Gaining control of Egypt meant securing the last Persian stronghold on the Mediterranean and preventing them from hiring mercenaries from the region on the way. Alexander faced strong resistance at Gaza, a fortified city on the route between Egypt and the rest of the Persian Empire. After 2 months and 3 brutal assaults, the city fell. Alexander was wounded twice, and the entire male population was executed, while women and children were enslaved. 7 days later, Alexander entered Pelusium. The Egyptians, long oppressed by Persian rule, welcomed him as a liberator. The Persian governor, seeing the tide turn, surrendered the treasury and administrative power to Alexander. In 331 BC, he was proclaimed pharaoh of Egypt at Memphis. Alexander restructured Egypt's administration, promised to respect local customs and gods, and paid tribute to native deities. While he remained in Egypt, the Persian navy in the Aegean was defeated, ending the last significant threat from the sea. In the spring of 331 BC, Alexander left Egypt to resume his eastern campaign. As he advanced through Assyria, Persian satraps retreated. Macedonian scouts soon discovered that Darius III had gathered a massive army on the plains of Gaugamela, though vastly outnumbered. Alexander again employed clever tactics. Instead of heading straight to Babylon as originally planned, he turned to face Darius. Darius positioned his troops on the wide, flat plains, intending to use cavalry to encircle Alexander's army. In response, Alexander ranged his forces in an oblique formation, focusing power on the Persian right flank. While Persian cavalry attacked the Macedonian left, Alexander led his elite companion cavalry in a charge that broke through the Persian lines, targeting Darius himself. The Persian king once again fled the field. Alexander pursued Darius, who escaped into Media, while he himself entered Babylon. which surrendered without resistance. He appointed a Persian satrap as governor, establishing a policy of cooperation with Persian nobility. Though he left behind a strong Macedonian garrison, Darius, on the run, tried to regroup in the east. Meanwhile, Alexander marched to Susa, one of the Persian capitals, which also surrendered peacefully, in gratitude. Alexander retained the existing governor and sent much of the royal treasury back to Macedonia. Back in Greece, Antipater, whom Alexander had left as regent, faced challenges. Despite Persian defeat, a Greek king named Agis III of Sparta tried to rally the Peloponnesians into rebellion. Initially, he won victories against Macedonian forces, but other Greek states, especially Athens, refused to join. Alexander cleverly won over the Greeks, returning sacred artifacts stolen by the Persians and releasing Athenian prisoners taken in battle. This earned him goodwill. Antipater then marched south with 40,000 troops and defeated Agis III, who died in battle. In autumn 331 BC, news of the Macedonian victory at Gaugamela spread across Europe. Greek resistance finally ended. Alexander pushed deeper into Persia after capturing Persepolis, the symbolic capital of the Persian kings. His troops looted the city for days. Eventually, he burned it down as a message to both Persians and Greeks. In 330 BC, Alexander personally led a cavalry unit in pursuit of Darius, but before he could reach him, Darius was betrayed and murdered by his own general. Thus, Alexander honored Darius's body, buried him with royal rites, and proclaimed himself the legitimate heir to the Persian throne. He rewarded loyal Persian nobles, and even allowed some to keep their positions. This strategy was necessary, as his own Macedonian troops were growing weary and homesick after years of campaign. To maintain his momentum, Alexander allowed some veterans to return home and recruited Persian soldiers into his army before going after Bessus. Alexander had to quell several uprisings in the eastern provinces. Local Persian governors feared losing their lands and surrendered Bessus to him. Following Persian customs, Alexander had Bessus mutilated and executed. In 327 BC, he crossed the Hindu Kush to begin his campaign into India, a mysterious and little-known land to the Greeks. The Indus Valley, once under nominal Persian control, had long been fragmented into independent kingdoms. Alexander's mission was to reclaim Persian territories and expand beyond them. In 327 BC, he led a 120,000-strong army into the valley. Despite fierce resistance, the Macedonians conquered most kingdoms. In 326 BC, the powerful Magadha kingdom ruled the Ganges Valley. Alexander planned to conquer it, but his troops, exhausted after 8 years away from home, refused to continue. Reluctantly, Alexander agreed and prepared for the journey home. On his return through the Jedrogen Desert, many soldiers perished due to the extreme conditions. He finally reached Susa in 324 BC, seeking to unite the Persians and Macedonians. Alexander organized mass marriages between his officers and Persian noble women, and appointed Persians to high-ranking positions. Alexander appointed Persians to commanding positions in the military and bestowed Macedonian military titles upon many Persian units. As Alexander began to set his sights on conquering Arabia, he personally conducted exploratory missions along the Euphrates River, seeking potential landing sites on the Arabian Peninsula. But before his plans could be realized, on June 13, 323 BC, he suddenly died from severe malaria at the age of just 32. His death was so abrupt and shocking that, when news of it reached Greece, many refused to believe it. Alexander passed away without naming a successor, and he left no legitimate heir. His only son, Alexander IV, was born after his death. The Empire of Macedonia fell into serious crisis. Just as Alexander had foreseen on his deathbed, he warned, "My funeral will be soaked in blood." And so it was. A brutal power struggle broke out among his generals, each vying for control over different parts of the empire. The vast Macedonian empire that Alexander the Great had built soon fractured, dividing into several smaller kingdoms, each ruled by his former commanders, known as the Diadochi, or successors. The life of Alexander the Great was a magnificent symphony of ambition, brilliance, and tragedy. In just over a decade, he conquered nearly the entire known world of his time. But Alexander was more than a military genius. He was a visionary who sought to unite East and West, to blend cultures instead of simply subduing them. He elevated Persians into his army, arranged mass marriages to bridge civilizations, and dreamed of an empire that transcended borders. Yet his sudden death at the age of 32, without a named successor, plunged his vast empire into chaos. As he had foreseen on his deathbed, "My funeral will be soaked in blood." His generals, once united under one banner, turned against each other, dividing the empire into fragments. Alexander's legacy is not just measured by territory, but by the eternal question he left behind. Can one man conquer the world and still preserve peace? Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of this video. We hope this journey through the rise and fall of Alexander the Great inspired you, moved you, and offered a new perspective on history. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful historical journeys. We'll see you in the next episode. Until then, stay curious, stay inspired, and never stop exploring the past.